mean, this is not simply somebody with extreme views. These are views that are on the crackpot fringe, and I think are some indication of a character problem.
Hello and welcome to the Americano Show. I'm joined today by Ambassador John Bolton, who was formerly the United States' ambassador to the United Nations, and also, perhaps surprisingly, Donald Trump's longest-serving national security advisor. I say surprisingly because the two men dislike each other intensely now, and John Bolton is one of Donald Trump's leading critics, especially as his second administration is about to come into existence. John, thank you for coming onto Americano. First of all, you've already made quite a few headlines with your responses to various cabinet appointments. Can you give me an overall view, first of all, about what you think about the incoming administration?
Well, I have to say Trump is off to a very fast start in naming a lot of his senior advisors. And I think that reflects preparation that he didn't undertake in 2016. But of course, he's been president before, so he has some idea of what his priorities are. But it is a fast start. In many cases, however, it's been a stumbling start. The nomination of Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General lasted all of about 8 days. That was really about 8 days longer than it should have lasted because Gaetz was utterly unqualified for the job. There are several other nominees that are very, very problematic and I don't think should be confirmed. There are some that are kind of mediocre and there are some that are pretty good. The theme that binds them all together, however, is the kind of loyalty to Trump that goes beyond conventional loyalty as we understand it. I mean, loyalty is a virtue normally. You want your team to be loyal, to be supportive, and to work together. I don't think what Trump wants really is loyalty. I think what he wants is fealty. He wants submission. He doesn't want a lot of people offering their opinions, especially when they may differ from his. He wants to say things, and he wants people to say, yes, sir. So on Ukraine, for example, I'm even more worried now than I was before about the policy that Trump will pursue, although he doesn't really do policy in the conventional sense, but his direction on Ukraine will not, I think, cause debate or discussion inside his administration.
Let's go through a couple of the ones you find most problematic. And it's Sebastian Gorka, who's coming in as an assistant or advisor to the president and in charge of counterterrorism, apparently. You describe him as a con man. Why do you call him a con man?
Well, if you go back to a number of things that came up basically back in 2017, the first year of the first term of the Trump administration, when he was fired by then Chief of Staff John Kelly, shortly after Steve Bannon was fired by Trump himself. CNN reported a series of questions about Gorka's academic credentials, which, to say the least, looked inflated. And I think he is a classic example of somebody whose loyalty is not to the country or the Constitution, but to Trump personally. And to put him in charge of counterterrorism at the NSC, it's not a Senate-confirmed position. None of the appointments in the White House are, but a very senior job among the several senior directors that handle broad areas of responsibility. I don't think he ought to be on the NSC staff at all, let alone in that job.
And your objections to him are about the content of his character rather than his ideology, because on, say, Russia, Iran, the war against jihadism, he's possibly even to the right of you.
Well, if Donald Trump suddenly became a supporter of negotiation with the Ayatollah Khamenei to resolve the nuclear question, Gorka would be right there with Trump. I would resign at that point.
Right. And another person you're troubled by, who is perhaps more ideologically opposed to you, or you are opposed to them, is Tulsi Gabbard, who's coming in as Director of National Intelligence, if confirmed. You've described it as the worst cabinet appointment in history.
Right. I had to amend that when Gaetz was nominated to be Attorney General. He then became the worst cabinet nominee in history, but Tulsi's right there behind him in a close second. She's not qualified for that job. She received briefings by intelligence officials during her tenure in Congress, after one of which, on the Trump decision to eliminate Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Quds Force, for decades of killing Americans through terrorist activity in the Middle East. Gabbard got an intelligence briefing along with other members of Congress and came out and said in public that Trump had committed an illegal and unconstitutional act of war by eliminating Qasem Soleimani, a really incredible proposition. It would have fit right into a discussion in the Supreme Council of Iran among the Ayatollahs. She said things about the war in Ukraine that, I'll just put it this way, are very similar to Russian propaganda, including the unbelievable assertion that Russia had basically had to invade Ukraine for defensive purposes because of U.S.-funded Ukrainian biological warfare laboratories in Ukraine. I mean, this is not simply somebody with extreme views. These are views that are on the crackpot fringe, and I think are some indication of a character problem in this nominee, which, by the way, is infinitely more important than Seb Gorka on the NSC staff. I think this is one where, and I apply it to Gorka as well, the tradition, the norm in dealing with Senate scrutiny of presidential nominees is that they receive a full FBI background investigation, so that anything in their past that could be compromising, that could be detrimental to the president or the country, the FBI, hopefully turns up these troubling facts and makes it available to the Senate to help in their decision whether to advise and consent.
You've suggested there slightly that Gabbard might have dual loyalties. I mean, she has served in the American military. She fought in Iraq. Is it not just that you disagree with her ideologically and so you're questioning her character?
Well, I'm not myself saying she's got foreign affiliations, although some have. Mitt Romney once said of her remarks about Ukraine that they were treasonous. Somebody can have a record. I'm not questioning her record in the military, but take the Soviet spy Alger Hiss. When he was accused of being a spy by Whittaker Chambers back in the 50s, people said, but he studied at Harvard Law School with Felix Frankfurter. He clerked for the Chief Justice of the United States. He worked in the Roosevelt administration. His brother was a partner of Dean Acheson's at the prominent law firm of Covington and Burling. How could Alger Hiss be a spy? But he was.
Get a free bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label Whiskey when you subscribe to The Spectator in our Black Friday sale. Go to spectator.co.uk/Friday.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine, since you've mentioned it a couple of times. The exiting Biden administration is ramping up the conflict, I think it's fair to say. You've described it as too little, too late. But are you not a little bit concerned, or do you not agree slightly with people in Trump world who are suspicious that the Biden administration is trying to make things worse so that Donald Trump has a difficult time when he comes into office and tries to end the war?
Well, if that's their attitude, it's paranoia, because Trump can reverse those decisions in the flick of an eye.
But it might be, by then we might be in World War III.
No, we're not going to be in World War III. The problem with the Biden administration is that in the period 2021-22, he failed to deter the Russians from the invasion, obviously. In fact, he said it on two distinct occasions he didn't think deterrence would work, and he basically didn't try it. No guarantee it would have worked if he had done more, but he didn't even try. But in the nearly 3 years now since the Russian invasion, we in NATO have been deterred by the Russians. You hear the White House constantly talking about the fear of a wider war. Well, there are two ways Putin could wage a wider war. One is conventional, one is nuclear. On the conventional side, where is Putin's secret army? Where is this army that's going to wage a wider war? And by the way, if he's got one, why isn't it in Ukraine, making up for the appalling performance of the existing Russian army in Ukraine? On the nuclear side, we've had public testimony from American intelligence officials before Congress that every time Putin rattled the nuclear saber, there was no evidence that they could detect of Russian nuclear forces, rocket forces, or others being moved into a readier position to engage in nuclear activity. It's been bluff.
So
Now, I'm not saying you don't
about...
take these threats seriously, but if you simply succumb to somebody's bluff, they get it for nothing.
Well, you do seem to be suggesting not to take them seriously if you think it's bluff.
Well, you take it seriously so you can evaluate it. And if you determine it's bluff, you act on that basis. I think the hesitating, non-strategic way that Biden has provided assistance to Ukraine and NATO as a whole have helped contribute to the gridlock. And it's one reason Trump has so much support, ill-advised support, in my view, for coming to an end to this war that will be very disadvantageous to Ukraine. If the Biden people had ever thought strategically about what was necessary to achieve their goals and provided the assistance on a more strategic basis so that Ukraine could apply that force more effectively, the battlefield might not be gridlocked at this point.
But if it is, as you've suggested, too late, what is the point in doing it? What is the point in firing missiles up inside Russia now? The US and the UK both part of the act of firing those missiles. If it's too late, why do it now?
Frankly, I don't know why they're doing it now, except maybe to preserve Biden's reputation.
You don't suspect that it's a worry that Trump will come in and resolve the war, so it's an attempt to make things more complicated, more difficult on the domestic front?
Look, Trump said during the campaign he would get Zelensky and Putin in a room and they'd resolve it in 24 hours. Now, that's not going to happen, but Trump thinks he's the master of the deal. And so landmines and relaxing the rules on the targeting of ATACMS isn't going to change that. Now, in fact, he will not make a deal within 24 hours between Putin and Zelensky. That won't be his fault because it's never his fault. So therefore, it must be somebody else's fault. And I worry very much that Putin will work his way with Trump and they'll decide it's Zelensky's fault and it will be bad news for Ukraine.
On the incoming Trump administration military, Donald Trump has proposed, it says he's going to, fire all transgendered US Army personnel. Do you think that's a bad idea?
Well, I don't know how many of them there are.
15,000, apparently.
Well, who knows? Look, I do not support the woke agenda in the slightest. I don't think the U.S. military should be an object of social experimentation. And I think that under Biden, it did get out of hand. There's a way to correct that. There's a proper way to correct it and an improper way to correct it. And it sounds to me like from some of the things Trump has said on the campaign trail, which don't necessarily guarantee that he'll follow them, that he's going to proceed in a very potentially destructive fashion. So this is, as I say, not something I object to trying to get back on a more even keel, but I do worry that Trump sees the military as something he will use as his instrument in the American political context, which I find very dangerous.
What do you think about the seemingly all-expansive role of Elon Musk in the incoming administration? I mean, he's been very rude about you on Twitter. He said you're a staggeringly dumb warmonger. What do you think when you think about Elon Musk?
Well, he's obviously grown very close to Trump. I suspect that there may be commercial motivations there. Don't ask me why. Heaven forbid. He's only the richest man in the world. He could be so rich this is pure altruism. Who knows? But he will find, and Trump will find, that there's a pretty clear line drawn in statute between being a member of the executive branch of the U.S. government and being a private citizen. Right now, in the transition, which is not something that you have in the United Kingdom, at least nothing like what we have, everybody at Mar-a-Lago is a private citizen. That will change at noon on the 20th of January. And so, too, will the rules that apply to what people are able to do. I hope that Musk is successful at finding $2 trillion of non-defense spending to cut from the annual U.S. budget. I'd be happy if he found $3 trillion. But the only way to do that, at least as I understand the arithmetic, is to go after Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the so-called entitlements programs, which Trump has vowed he will not touch. The government is not the world's most efficient organization, and if Musk can make it better, I'm all in favor of it. I don't think he has the slightest idea at this point what he needs to do, though.
It's been said quite a lot that Trump is improvisational in his approach to foreign affairs and to diplomacy. And he's even suggested that he'd like to use you, when you were his national security advisor, as a sort of scary figure to intimidate people in negotiations, to think, I've got John Bolton with me, I'm quite willing to nuke you. Do you think there's some merit in the argument that this eccentric, transactional, madman approach to diplomacy is quite effective?
No, I think it's a rationalization, and I think it stems from this fundamental point. Trump does not have a philosophy. He does not do policy the way we understand that. His life, like his real estate career, is a series of dots, one after the other. And his decisions in his first term, many of which, probably most of which I agreed with, I'd describe as an archipelago of dots, just kind of out there somewhere. You can try and draw lines between them, but he can't. And it's everything is in the moment, viewed through the prism of what benefits Donald Trump. And in some cases, who was the last person who talked to him? And I think that is not beneficial in foreign affairs, because while tactical surprise against your enemies is almost uniformly a good idea, continually surprising your allies decreases their faith in your reliability and your resolve, and that's not good.
But nevertheless, I think quite a few people point towards Trump's record as a foreign policy president and say he was a lot more successful than his predecessors, or indeed Joe Biden.
Well, if you're comparing him to Barack Obama and Joe Biden, you're comparing him to two of the worst foreign policy presidents going.
George W. Bush?
No, I don't think that's a fair comparison. And I will say, even in the case of the Trump administration, where he points to successes like tough sanctions against Russia, which it's true he imposed, he did it kicking and screaming at the prompting of some of his advisors.
But I mean, I suppose what I'm getting at is that one of the reasons Trump was elected the first time, and indeed again, is that he's seen as someone who opposes endless wars, foreign interventions that go disastrously wrong for America. He has a point there, even if you disagree with it.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. You know, as the saying went from colonial times, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And for example, Trump's decision to deal with the Taliban, to make a deal to get out of Afghanistan, which Biden then implemented very poorly, but he implemented Trump's deal, was a catastrophic decision for the United States. Foreign terrorists are now back in Afghanistan. They've shown already they can carry out terrorist attacks at a distance. The Russians, by every account I've seen, drew a direct line between the withdrawal from Afghanistan that Trump wanted to do, all troops out, that was his goal. They drew a direct line between that and the invasion of Ukraine. So we can go down the list, and I'm certainly happy to do that. But Trump can get a fascination with some particular thing to do, which doesn't mean he's got a long-range foreign policy. The whole madman theory developed between Nixon and Henry Kissinger, when Nixon said to Kissinger, you tell the communist Chinese that if they do X, that madman Nixon could do almost anything. The reason Nixon's threat was credible was because he was a known hardline anti-communist, and the threat to take tough action against China, therefore, was credible. Trump, having no philosophy, is seen by adversaries like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping as an opportunist that they can manipulate.
Well, lastly, John, because I know we're running out of time, but you've written a book about this, so it's a bit unfair to ask you, but when was the moment when you realized that Donald Trump's presidency was destructive in your eyes, because you did serve in it for a long time?
Right. Well, it built up over a period of time with sort of one lesson after another. And I stayed in the job as long as I could, as long as I thought there was a chance that my advice would be productive. And when I finally gave up, that was the point I resigned. Now, I've been criticized by friends who said you had a duty to stay longer to try and keep the train on the tracks. And I've been criticized by other people who say you should have resigned after about the first 8 or 10 days because you knew by then how bad it was and you should have exposed it. You know, maybe both criticisms are right, or maybe I did what I thought was the best I could. In any event, that's how it turned out.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much for coming on to Americano.
Glad to be with you.